When I think about it, I was always inferior to those around me. If I ran in a race, I would fall and scrape my knees, crying my eyes out, and I was the last to master the alphabet from A to Z. The only special thing I could do was perform magic tricks my dad, who's really into it, taught me. My dad, who had been a member of a magic circle during his school days, taught me various magic tricks. When I produced a silk rose from under a handkerchief, my mom would react with great delight. I truly began to enjoy it when I was in kindergarten. The claps I got at the birthday party kick-started everything.
Howard, you're amazing. You could become a professional magician.
The friends and teachers who usually don't bother much about me suddenly started giving me a lot of attention, making me feel more confident, and I always amazed everyone with my magic at school events. I only realized much later that all their praise was mere flattery. When I said I wanted to become a professional magician, my parents strongly opposed it. Only a handful of geniuses can make a living from their art.
You're just an ordinary person. It's too much for you.
My dad would say that and lecture me, and my mom would cry, begging me to reconsider. Yet I persisted because I had a dream of standing on a sold-out stage, basking in the spotlight. If I made it big as a magician, my face and name would circulate in the media. I could become a world-famous star, or so I thought until I was confronted with the reality of my own abilities. After high school, I skipped college to apprentice with a professional performer and honed various skills. And just so you know, you can definitely be a magician without going to school or having any qualifications. It's like being a comic artist or a novelist. Even if you don't make it, you can claim to be one. That's why those without talent are weeded out. Like many others, I struggled to make a living even after my master deemed me competent enough to be independent. Trying to make a living with magic in this day and age is definitely a minority choice. Performers are particularly scrutinized by society, often mocked as just extending their playtime into something profitable. My biggest supporter turned out to be my wife, Mandy. Mandy, a career woman, bought an apartment at the young age of 33 and was on a smooth path to promotion at her company. Our story began when I was still an apprentice for a certain magician. I was hired as an assistant for a company president's retirement ceremony. Mandy was the one who organized the event, and we hit it off immediately.
I'm just an underling now, but in a few years my magic will fill a hall.
Mandy, who prioritized stability and had taken a solid job, seemed smitten by my big talk, sparkling-eyed like a boy. A few years into our relationship, she was promoted to section chief and bought a 2-room apartment. In contrast, it's embarrassing even to compare to her. After being evicted from a cheap apartment because I couldn't pay the rent, I ended up living in Mandy's apartment and performing as a street magician. Despite the poor optics of being a kept man, we married, but living with a wife who earns 4 times as much made me feel incredibly inferior. As I performed street magic, pulling silk flowers from handkerchiefs and hats, few people stopped to watch. I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong. So I spent my days playing videos of famous magicians and filling a notebook with new magic ideas. Mandy, tired of my failures, increasingly picked fights. At least wash the dishes in the sink. You're pretty much getting everything handed to you.
How could you say that?
If it bothers you, try earning as much as me or double that. I'm supporting us, so at least take care of the house. You're not just watching videos under the guise of research while you're here. Even a sea lion works harder than you. Being belittled about income hurt my pride. I was continuously berated to get a stable job and think about my age until my patience finally snapped.
I married you because you begged me to. If it weren't for me, you'd be an old maid by now.
I realized I messed up with my words after it was too late. Mandy kicked me out of the apartment. While I reflected on my self-inflicted situation, I also felt anger towards her harsh words. I just want to earn enough for a hotel stay. If a hotel is too expensive, I don't mind a hostel, so I perform in front of the station. I make flowers bloom from a silk hat and create a shower of confetti with a wave of my handkerchief, then wait for a reaction with a contrived bow. Yet the crowd still doesn't stop. Is my magic too mediocre to even make people pause?
You've gotten better, haven't you?
A petite old lady was clapping in front of me. She was my first customer of the day. I couldn't help but tear up, and I rubbed my eyes with the back of my hand.
Thank you. Please take this,
I said with a strained voice, handing over a white silk rose. Just then, the old lady's stomach growled loudly.
Are you hungry? Yes, I feel like I haven't eaten in a long time.
Her vague responses increased my anxiety. I stepped forward, ignoring the feeling that I was getting involved in trouble because I wanted to thank the only audience member who enjoyed my magic. I don't perform magic just for applause. I started doing magic because I wanted to make people happy. I finally remembered my original intention.
Let me treat you.
Pointing to a diner near the station, the old lady's face lit up. We entered the shop together and had soup at the counter. Talking over the steam, I became convinced she was mistaking me for her son. Her son, Ted Cooper, was also skilled at magic and often performed it for her. From her wandering alone in front of the station and her disjointed speech, I quickly suspected she might have dementia. My decision to invite her for a meal seemed right. I nodded absent-mindedly to the old lady's reminiscences, and after returning the empty bowl, I took her to the nearest police station. The old lady, clutching the white rose, was cheerful throughout. Honestly, I can't afford this right now. Treating someone to soup has reduced my funds, leaving me with no choice but to sleep outside tonight. Afterward, I lived almost like a homeless person, performing magic on the streets and barely getting by on the few coins thrown my way. I thought about calling Mandy from a public phone to apologize, but I resisted because I didn't want to grovel when I was down and out. Stubborn pride. Yeah, it is pride. The next time we meet, I want to stand tall not just as a musician, but as a man. Thinking this, I change a red rose to a white rose under a handkerchief, just as a luxury car pulls up in front of me. A gentleman steps out from the back seat, comparing my face and the rose in my hand, and breaks into a smile.
It reminds me of those days.
He invites me to get in the car, and though I hesitate, wondering whether to run away, trusting his gentle demeanor and well-kept appearance, I nervously settle into the back seat. If anything happens, I can always make a scene and jump out. The gentleman's name is Ted Cooper. He was the son of the old lady. Indeed, she had dementia and had slipped out of the house while her caretaker was briefly distracted and had been missing for 3 days.
I heard you were performing magic in front of the station. The white rose was the red clue.
Identifying the white rose the old lady brought back with my props, Ted pinpointed my location with incredible determination. When Ted was in elementary school, his family was poor. His father died early, and his mother worked multiple part-time jobs to raise her son. At one time, magic became hugely popular in Ted's grade. Envious of his wealthy friends who bought instructional books and props, his mother, who made artificial flowers at home, gave him a white rose made of tissue paper and praised his magic.
Watching you earlier, I was reminded of how passionate I was about magic back then.
Looking nostalgic, Ted turns to me and makes an unexpected offer.
If you're willing, would you perform at a facility I own?
Ted was a businessman devoted to charity work. He managed facilities that included nursing homes, child welfare institutions, and pediatric wards. He was actively involved in hosting seasonal events, inviting performers from both domestic and international venues, and was dedicated to talent development. Without hesitation, I agreed, and as I toured the facilities, I felt a change beginning in my mindset. I finally understand the basics I overlooked when I was desperately trying to get more people to look my way. I forgot the smile a performer must never lose, and dropped the spirit of service meant to entertain people.
Even a graceful swan is desperately struggling beneath the surface of the water, showing that struggle is characteristic of second or third-rate performers. A first-rate magician must always be delightful. Doesn't even the unhappiest person need a moment to forget their sorrows?
At first, I didn't understand my master's lesson at all, but now I truly do. How can I entertain people more? I've been testing out mime in my magic performances, and it's been great to bring some humor to the audience. Elderly people with dementia, children abandoned by their parents, and young patients fighting illness all laugh at my combination of mime and magic. A year later, my activities are covered by the media and attract attention. With the backing of Ted, my manager, I am able to perform a solo show at a community center hall. In the front row sit Ted and his mother. Watching from the middle row are my former master and my parents. I also sent an invitation to one more very important person. Whether they come or not is a gamble. The show finally begins. Thanks to the media's promotion, the hall is full. A recently discharged little girl is thrilled by a dove flying from a top hat. A group of elderly people accompanied by staff have their eyes shining, and children from a foster care facility reach for the confetti. Maybe they won't come after all. While maintaining my best smile, I gaze at the empty VIP seat with resignation and disappointment. At the same time, the door at the back of the hall bursts open, and Mandy, out of breath, rushes in. Ah, she made it. I grab the microphone and, looking straight at Mandy, who just took her seat, I declare,
"This magic is dedicated to all of you who came today and to my beloved wife."
As the mechanism above is set off, next thing you know, it's raining white roses all over the audience. These are not just any artificial flowers, but a creation from my idea and Ted's funding. These miraculous roses change from white to red as they detect human body heat.
"I'm sorry for a year ago. I want to propose to you once again. I will take any request from you for an encore as many times as you wish."
Oh, geez. You're a real fool. This time I propose to Mandy, who's holding a red rose, and she's laughing and crying in happiness. And applause erupts from the audience.
Where are you now? The ceremony is starting. I yelled into the phone, finally connected to my husband, Danny. Family trip in Cancun. Even though it's your daughter's wedding? Laughing heartily, Danny simply hung up the phone on me. Family, huh? I mulled over the thought, feeling its irony anew. After staring at the disconnected phone for a while, I shifted my emotions quickly and made another call. About that favor I asked for a while back. I need it done as soon as possible, please. I rattled off my request energetically. Yes, I'm leaving it all in your hands, so please start immediately. An enthusiastic voice responded from the other end. The person I was talking to belonged to a civil engineering company that had long been friendly with my family home. As I listened, I couldn't help but suppress a chuckle internally. Enjoy your so-called family trip for now. I thought to myself that this might be your last bit of enjoyment. My name is Grace Norman. I am 52 years old. A housewife with 2 children. My husband, Danny, is 55. Our marriage, now nearly 30 years ago, was somewhat of a strategic alliance between companies. However, it seems it will soon end, due to Danny's recurring issues. It's not as if there were signs of separation from the beginning. At least, I thought I was building a warm home with Danny, even if it was a marriage primarily for business alliances. Danny thought the same at the time. That changed after our 2 children were born. Soon after the marriage, I had our first child, a son named Ted. And the following year, our daughter Kelly was born. While having children was a joy, parenting was tougher than I imagined. At that time, Danny, who was just in his early 30s, was still in his apprenticeship phase at his father's company. Perhaps that contributed to his stress. Even when he came home, he didn't participate in parenting. Our children's cries filled our home, and as I became overwhelmed by childcare, Danny seemed to grow distant and used work as an excuse to stay away from home. Honestly, I have some regrets too. I was overwhelmed with parenting but insisted on doing everything myself without asking for help. My mother from my family home was the one who helped me. My parents, now deceased, were a blessing I truly appreciated at the time. Without the housekeeper my mother arranged for me, I would have definitely suffered from parenting burnout. But once we got through that phase, the children were truly adorable. With Danny constantly being at his family's business and hardly ever coming home, raising the children became my life's purpose. Yet, my growing distrust of Danny, who was hardly ever home, led me to ask him, "Where are you always going?" At the time, Danny evaded the question with vague answers. But when he didn't accompany our daughter and son to their baptism, I finally confronted him. His reply was, "You can handle that side of things. I have my own responsibilities." I couldn't imagine what he had to do. What could be so important that you neglect your children's events? I demanded in anger. Danny's answer was unexpected. "You know I have a much younger sister, right?" "Yes, I remember you mentioned she's 13 years younger." "Candace, right?" "That's right, Candace. It's her sweet 16 soon, and I have to discuss some things with our parents about it." His tone, seemingly prioritizing his sister over his own children, infuriated me. But Danny retorted as if it was the most natural thing. "You've been so focused on the kids that you wouldn't know. But they also have their own difficulties." I was at a loss for words. But similar incidents kept happening. Danny declined attending even the kindergarten and elementary school sports day because of his sister. He would miss the baptism but attend the Sweet 16. Miss the sports day but be there for Candace's graduation. Where exactly does he consider home, and who does he see as his family? I pondered this often. And so, I attended the children's baptism, nursery school sports day, graduation, and elementary school sports day alone. In the children's commemorative photos, the figure of their father gradually ceased to appear. Eventually, the children also realized that their father did not participate in their events. As they grew up and faced exams, college admissions, and employment, they continued to move forward on their own volition. Both of them would first find what they wanted to do, then look for a school that matched their interests, considering if they could even get into such schools. Before consulting me with something like, "I want to go here, what should I do?" "I don't want to burden you, Mom," they would say, even as early as middle school. It wasn't bad that they knew what they wanted. It showed they had a strong sense of independence. But as a parent, especially seeing their father as unreliable, it saddened me. My presence likely wasn't much of a role model. Since our marriage, I had been a full-time housewife. Occasionally, I was called upon for matters related to my family's company. My parents seemed eager to leave some sort of asset to me early on. And my brother also agreed with this approach. By the way, my parents passed away 10 years ago. They were both in their 70s. The company was left in the hands of my brother, Ted, and I received a sizable inheritance apart from that. Danny, my brother, has always been overly involved with his younger sister. She was spoiled by her parents and Danny. And after being coddled through her sweet college graduation, she landed a job at a subsidiary through our father's connections. However, it seems she was never really committed to her job. After working for 2 years, she quit, claiming she needed to prepare for marriage. It seems she never really liked working and has since been idling away her days at home. Neither her parents nor Danny ever criticized her for this. In fact, they seemed pleased that she didn't work, as if it was expected of her. Despite actively participating in arranged marriage meetings, She always ended up breaking them off, apparently because Danny opposed most of them. Whenever Danny objected, she simply accepted his decisions without question. Now, she's in her 40s, unmarried, and just staying put. The in-laws, unlike my parents who passed away early, are still vigorous in their 80s. Unlike my parents, who passed away early, it seems that his parents are still robust and spry. But normally, one would still worry. Yet, Candace does nothing and continues to live a carefree life. Because they are healthy, the father-in-law remains the company president. With no sign that Danny is about to take over. Danny probably wishes to assume the presidency soon. But it seems that his father-in-law is not ready to step down. I don't know the reason for this. I had long since lost patience with Danny. Even my brother and his wife suggested that it might be better to separate. And as the children have grown independent, I've been thinking about starting a second life for myself. Luckily, my parents left me a substantial estate. I can either start something new or take a break. I've been considering this for a long time. And now, I'm gathering evidence to ensure I come out ahead in the divorce. My brother's lawyer has been advising me on this. However, an event that has postponed these plans has occurred. Kelly is getting married. She met someone 8 years her senior at my brother's company, where she works. He's quite competent and is expected to be transferred overseas soon. Kelly, having seen the poor example set by Danny's sister, has always kept quiet about her family connections at work. Boasting about such things is foolish. Just like at school, flaunting wealth only makes you disliked. That was Kelly's point. I've tried to inform Danny about the wedding. As expected, Danny keeps saying he's too busy and quickly avoids the topic. All I can do is watch and say, I see. Still, I've sent him the details via invitation and messages. There was no need to confirm the schedule with him specifically. On the day of the wedding, we all headed to the venue. But there was no sign of Danny even on the morning of the event. I tried contacting him. Where are you now? The ceremony is starting. Family trip in Cancun. I blinked in surprise at his response. Grace Norman, even though it's your daughter's wedding? Danny just laughed and hung up. I sighed and looked up at the ceiling for a few seconds. Family, huh? I repeated to myself a couple of times. It's probably the in-laws and his sister he's in Cancun with. I knew it, but it's still appalling how far things have gone. For Danny, his family has always been his parents and sister, not us. I've known this for a long time. I never had high hopes for our strategic marriage. He must have felt the same. However, unlike Danny, I originally thought we could create a proper family. But he didn't. I've dragged this out for over 20 years for the sake of the children. They might have thought it didn't matter whether their father was around or not. Still, I wanted to maintain a semblance of a family until they were grown. That might have just been my own selfishness. The children probably found it easier without him. Oh well. I took a deep breath and redialed. Speaking into the phone, I quickly said, Hello, it's me. Yes, Grace Norman here. It's about the matter I had asked you about before. Please, I'd like it to be taken care of as soon as possible, starting immediately. Yes, I'm leaving everything in your hands, so please start right away. A vigorous voice replied from the other end. The person I was speaking to runs a civil engineering company. That has been close to my family for a long time. I had to suppress a chuckle as I thought to myself. Enjoy your holiday now, while you can. This might be your last enjoyment. A month later, I received a call on my tablet. The lawyer appeared on the screen with a broad smile. Ms. Norman, or rather, should I say Ms. Reed now? The lawyer called my maiden name. So, the documents have been processed? My voice quivered slightly with anticipation. Yes, everything has been thoroughly organized. The lawyer on the screen has been affiliated with my family's company. I continued, asking him, "Can you tell me what has happened in the last 2 weeks? I thought you might say that, so I've prepared thoroughly." As the lawyer adjusted his equipment on the other side of the screen, I couldn't help but laugh with joy. Currently, there is a distance that spans half the globe between us. Yes, I am now living in a house I bought in Italy. This came about because my daughter Kelly's husband was transferred to an overseas branch as part of their marriage plans. Kelly told me he was worried about my language skills. But you never know until you try, and once you're there, things will work out. So, it's going to be fine. I've always managed to make things work. Kelly and her husband are now stationed at the Italy branch. And I am living in a separate building on the property of their new home, partly for security reasons. The lawyer in my eyes seemed to have some control over the equipment on the other side of the screen. Let's start with this. He showed me what happened during Danny and his family's trip to Cancun. Wait a minute, why can't we get into this hotel today? He was shouting under a bright blue sky, wearing a tropical shirt. I'm sorry, but today the hotel is reserved for a wedding and its party. What? This hotel in Cancun? Yes, that day, there was a wedding in Cancun, which was Kelly's and her husband's. Danny and his family had flown from LA to Cancun, but by then, we were already directly to Cancun. We had planned to enjoy the resort leisurely before holding the ceremony. They didn't know about it at all. I had contacted them on the day, just in case. It's ridiculous they didn't even know we were on the Big Island. It shows how little they cared about us. That's strange, the lawyer commented. You did inform them of the destination, right, Ms. Reed? I did, through postcards and messages. They usually didn't catch me, but the call connected on the wedding day probably. Because they wanted to show off their family trip. The lawyer chuckled at this. I clearly left the information that the wedding would be held abroad. Right here at this hotel on the Big Island. And yet, how could they end up at the hotel and not stay there? They should have at least mentioned they were there for the wedding. In the video, the family's frustrated faces were shown. There was also a shot of Danny's sister, Candace, looking confused. The explanations were in English, but the murmurs around were in Spanish. She had majored in Spanish literature in college and could speak it somewhat. But there's been a 20-year gap. It seems she no longer understands Spanish well. From what I could hear from the murmuring staff, they were supposed to attend the wedding today. Indeed, we had instructed the staff. If these people come and say they are here for the wedding, let them in. If not, just for meals or staying. Please do not let them in as we have reserved the place for the wedding. The wedding went splendidly, and Kelly, her husband, and I flew from Cancun to Italy later that day. We had no plans to return to the US. Meanwhile, Danny and his family, furious, apparently planned to return to the US from the same international airport. However, they were stopped because the cards Danny had were no longer working. This was also captured on video by the staff following them. What do you mean? My credit isn't working? This one, too? Yes, sir. These are not in your name, are they? Indeed, that was the case. Danny had taken my credit cards and bank ATM cards, so I had them stopped. The bank account in question was one with my personal assets. Danny had accessed it, but I pretended not to notice. It was inevitable that he would get caught eventually. I had another account set aside, which I could use freely, so even if one was depleted, it wouldn't affect my living situation. I overlooked it to gather evidence. Damn, why isn't it working? Obviously, because the owner stopped them. If you say that, I can't go back. I don't have enough cash. The staff sighed and told them. Anyway, these cards can't be used, so you cannot board a flight to LA. They reluctantly returned to the city and had to borrow cash from the consulate to get back. It took them a while to think of asking the consulate. They tried borrowing money from acquaintances first, which took more time. Eventually, when that failed, they begged the embassy for help. Already past their planned stay, they were out of options. They were thoroughly squeezed at the consulate. After all, the issue was the stoppage of the cards. They were detained for a while because of suspected problematic behavior. Eventually, they managed to return to the US and repay the consulate from their own account. But when Danny came home to complain, he found nothing left. When they saw their house had been cleared, holding back laughter was impossible. What the hell is this? Danny yelled in front of the now empty home lot. The in-laws dropped their luggage. Our house, built nearly 30 years ago by my parents for us to live in as a new home upon our marriage, had always been well maintained and could have been sold if I chose to. However, it was my property, and since I planned to live in Italy, I didn't want to leave anything behind. So, I stored only the items that were clearly Danny's in a storage unit. And I instructed a disposal company to destroy everything else. That was the other call I made on the day of the wedding. Seeing Danny in such distress, scratching his head and stomping his feet, and finally kneeling and pounding his suitcase, I couldn't contain myself and burst into laughter. Hearing my laughter, Kelly came over. What's going on, Mom? Just watch this, Kelly. Your father is in quite a state. He's not my father anymore. As Kelly said this, she stared at the screen showing a for sale a sign standing in front of a now empty lot. Ah. That was our house. It's completely empty now, Kelly said with a wry smile. As a teenager, she had always found it creepy how her father favored her aunt far more than his own daughter. I knew she had always wanted to sever ties. I'm glad to see you're pleased, the lawyer commented. Thank you for the entertaining footage, but there's more, isn't there? I asked, and the lawyer, with a mischievous grin, replied, oh, there's more indeed. He then showed Danny's face again, looking frustrated and glaring at something. Danny slammed his hand on the desk. What the hell is this all about? There's nothing unusual here. Your wife, Grace, asked for a divorce petition to be filled out. Grace would never say something like that. Why do you say that? As Danny was about to respond, he suddenly remembered something. Right, the cards. Why did she stop the cards? The lawyer responded matter-of-factly, that's obvious. Anyone would do the same if they found out someone was misusing their account. Why were you using Grace's card in the first place? Didn't you have your own? Danny was at a loss for words. Or was it that you were short on funds? We had also looked into that. Honestly, there wasn't much money in the accounts of Danny or his parents at the moment. Just enough for the company to operate, and the rest was being siphoned from my savings. Danny had taken the card from me under the mistaken belief it was family money. He never had permission. That's why I could stop it so easily. Moreover, upon stopping it, we discovered a considerable amount of misuse. Misuse? But isn't it marital property? No, what are you talking about? Did you not know? The lawyer asked incredulously. The funds you were using were part of Grace's assets from before the marriage. Before the marriage? No, that can't be right. Grace never mentioned that. Perhaps she didn't feel the need to mention it unless something happened. And now, something has happened, hasn't it? What? Danny stood up abruptly. Grace has said there's no meaning in being a family with you anymore. At least, your children don't see you as their father. What? Indeed. Do you even know where your children studied, what they studied, whom they married, and more importantly, where your daughter got married? Danny was speechless. The lawyer then informed him about the date and location of Kelly's wedding. Then, Danny's expression changed dramatically. He muttered under his breath, "No way." Yes, that was the hotel you tried to stay at on that day. Danny, in disbelief, muttered, "That hotel?" Yes. Didn't you hear there was a wedding happening that day? I might have, but I never thought it was hers. Why wouldn't they let us in, then? That's simple. The lawyer then explained what I had instructed the hotel. Grace had informed them in advance. Why don't you check your phone? Haven't you been checking it all? Or did you have another phone? Faced with rapid-fire questions, Danny remained silent. Considering everything, it made sense. Danny likely had multiple phones and had habitually turned off the one connected to me. I had anticipated this because my messages often went unread for too long. I wondered if he had changed his phone number, which he would typically share just in case. I deliberately chose not to ask about it. This was all part of my plan. There is evidence that I sent messages. I left numerous voicemails. Are you listening properly? Are you there? I want you to see this. I carefully recorded my increasingly agitated state. The messages were the same. I had tried other methods as well. But Danny had completely shut me out, blocking all methods of communication. Therefore, the lawyer continued. Grace has decided to file a compensation claim for the misuse of funds. And is also seeking damages for your neglect of the family. Oh, and by the way, the financial support for your company will be cut off as well. As per instructions from her family. What? Let me see Grace, just once. Danny begged, almost crying. No, that would be futile. Why? Where is Grace now? She's definitely not in the US anymore. Danny's face at that moment was pitiful to watch. After the ceremony, Grace and her family immediately left for Italy. What? And you were detained, right? They left while you were stuck. Listening to this, Danny clenched his fists and trembled. Kelly, watching this, could hardly contain a grin. The lawyer then asked us, "How is it? Is this delightful footage enjoyable? Do you have more?" I asked. Yes, there is more, replied the lawyer. This next piece is from when Ted and I visited the company directly after Grace's divorce was finalized, leading to the dissolution of the business partnership. The lawyer showed me another video. Cutting off support? What do you mean? Can you do that? Our company can't survive without your support. Now it was the in-laws who raised their voices. Both were noticeably sunburned as they spoke. Yes, what's with the sunburn? Did you go on a trip somewhere? In the video, my brother was questioning the father-in-law. To a wedding. Kelly's. Yes. Kelly's wedding. It was in Cancun. Ted grinned slyly. Actually, I was there that day. At this, the two of them gasped. Of course, it was my lovely niece's wedding. On that day, my wife and I were both attending the ceremony in Cancun. Oh, and by the way, I've been well informed about what you were doing on that day. Sweat dripped down the in-laws' faces. And yet, you didn't immediately remember Kelly's name? How little interest do you have in those kids? Ted seized the moment to press them further. For your only 2 grandchildren, you can't even remember one of their names? What does that say? Well, those kids never warmed up to us. Warming up or not, what have you ever done for those kids? The in-laws were at a loss for words. Suddenly, there was a loud thumping as someone burst into the room. Wow, heavyweight. How old is this person? Kelly gasped in surprise. The person who had suddenly appeared on screen was Candace. Candace is 42 years old, I believe. She's 10 years older than my husband. Oh no. She's a classic case of a kidult. Indeed, that term fitted the situation perfectly. When you think about it, she's been a kidult for 20 years. What will she do now? I looked back at the screen. If the support is cut off, what will we do? What should I do? She confronted not the lawyer but her parents. I wonder what will happen. The father-in-law mumbled, unable to say much else. Well, the divorce is finalized, and as far as we're concerned, we have no reason to finance you anymore. What? Why did you let the divorce go through? Don't you understand? The deciding factor was the misappropriation by you folks. But it's marital property. Ted sighed deeply. Danny said the same thing. Well, of course, we were concerned about that. Which is why we gave Grace a living will of her assets before marriage. Does that mean you didn't trust us? How can there be trust for someone who has misused his wife's fortune? Besides, how long did your son neglect his wife, daughter, and grandchildren? The in-laws were speechless. Even I, her uncle, attended their baptism. Of course, Grace also came to us. Well, it seems that you stopped talking about family a long time ago, didn't you? Ted seemed to relish holding them accountable. Just like you mistook those 3 as a different family. Oh yes, remember what Danny said on the phone to Grace on the wedding day? He said he was going to Cancun with his family. Startled, the father-in-law looked up, and the mother-in-law covered her face. Family, huh? Who are you referring to? Ted directed a very pleased smile at the in-laws and Candace. And that's the drop. How was it? Thank you. I'm very satisfied. Please proceed with the next steps. Well, there isn't much left in terms of procedures. Kelly and I exchanged smiles at the lawyer's words. Later, the lawyer kept us updated on further developments. Occasionally, I also received updates from my brother Ted. First, the in-laws' company faced bankruptcy due to the cutoff of financing. And it seems it was absorbed by my brother's company. He felt obligated to save the employees at least. The support for their company was initially because the products made by the employees were good. Not because the in-laws managed it well. I hadn't heard much about this from our parents, but Ted explained it again. The former father-in-law was ousted as president. The former in-laws had to sell their home and land they owned to a reasonable extent and moved into a rental. They are now struggling with what to do next. They seem to have aged significantly due to this ordeal. And health issues that were previously managed by sheer willpower have begun to surface. Danny is now making a fuss about reserving a spot in a nursing home in hindsight. It seems financially difficult to enter one now. Danny himself managed to secure a job at a company of an acquaintance. The acquaintance initially hired Danny based on their past relationship, but realized he was unreliable due to the divorce incident. Initially, he was to be hired as a full employee, but his position was downgraded to a contract worker. It's a clear message, he could be easily dismissed if he missteps. Though it's lenient, I hope he continues there to repay his debts. As for Candace, she is living in a rental with her parents. Having been a kidult for 20 years, she's really incapable of much. Yet, as her savings are depleting, she's been persuaded by her desperate parents to start visiting job centers. However, her high job expectations make it difficult to find employment. That's hardly surprising. She seems to be considering marriage, but naturally, that's a high hurdle as well. I can only marvel at what she's been doing for the past 20 years. Meanwhile, our life in Italy is refreshingly bright and clear. Of course, living abroad comes with its risks. Sean, living in the US, calls often worried, but I reassure him each time that we're fine. Come visit sometime, and bring a nice bride if you can, I say, making Sean bashfully silent. As long as we choose a safe area to live, it's quite peaceful. Learning Italian slowly, getting along with other American families. Enjoying the bright sunshine and dry breeze, I ponder what to do next. Life is enjoyable. There's a timing for divorce. I won't say that my 30 years of marriage were all bad. But letting go now is what makes my future possible. From here on out, I want to live energetically and have fun with my daughter and her husband.